Hola, buenos dias, and thank you very much to Vance and the other organisers for providing this opportunity for me to be here today. I'm going to give you a perspective on Scotland that is complementary to the one we've just heard from the John Muir Trust. And my title is People in Rewilding, but I'm going to do that in reverse order. I'm going to talk about rewilding first and then come to people afterwards. So why do we need to rewild? Well, the reality of Scotland, despite the beautiful pictures we've just seen, is that it's a highly depleted landscape. Originally, most of the land would have been covered in forest, but over the centuries or even millennia, it's been stripped away. And we can see the remains of a depleted landscape now with erosion in the rivers because the riparian forest is gone. And if you look at this picture on the right here, you can see lumps of peat that have been washed downstream by the erosion. And in the background, you can see the ruins of a croft, a house from the people who used to live in this landscape. And we've heard already in this Congress that indigenous peoples have been displaced in North America and in Australia. The same thing has happened in Scotland in the past. In the second half of the 18th century, most of the Highland people were forced off the land. They went to Australia, Canada, and so forth, and to the cities. So we've inherited a depleted landscape. And these two photographs, taken about 2 kilometres apart, show some of what has been lost. The picture on the left is probably one of the largest and least disturbed forests left in the whole UK. But 2 kilometres away, there's only a skeleton as a reminder of how it used to spread. So we can see the magnitude of what's been lost, but also the opportunities for restoration, for rewilding. So just to summarise, most of our native forest is gone. Populations of many of the dependent species have been depleted. Other species, especially the top mammals and predators, are removed completely. Ecological processes are no longer functioning. We heard a lot about processes yesterday. And human pressures maintain the land in this condition of minimal ecological vitality and productivity. Much of the land is in a state of what could be termed arrested succession. The photo on the left shows what we call peat hags, areas where the weather has broken up the surface vegetation, the underlying peat is exposed, revealing the stumps of our vanished forest. And the pressure of overgrazing from herbivores, and thank you very much to Sally from Australia, but we don't want any deer back in Scotland, we've got too many. That pressure of herbivores prevents the healing of the land and the growth of any vegetation. On the right, the fence prevents deer from crossing a road that's just out of picture, and when the deer don't go there, you can see the succession comes into effect again. You can see heather replacing grass, and there's even a little birch seedling coming up next to the fence post there. Deer are a woodland animal, but in the absence of predators and with our present unjust distribution of land ownership in Scotland, where it's concentrated in the hands of absentee, many foreign landowners who like to shoot deer, they want more deer. Deer numbers have increased radically, and the deer eat any seedlings that get established to death. For 200 years, not a single young tree has been able to get established. So we've got this remnant woodland, which we call the geriatric forest. And we've heard a lot about needing to engage the young generation of people in wilderness. We also really desperately need to engage a younger generation of trees in Scotland. It's a severe issue. This is a particular cluster of seedlings I've been photographing for 20 years. And you can see in the most recent picture taken in June last year, those overgrazed seedlings were smaller than they were 20 years previously. And there's not a living tree in that landscape. This is what we've inherited from the past. So people began becoming aware of this in the 70s and 80s in particular. This is an experimental project done by the Government Conservation Agency, fencing deer out. And you can see in the left-hand photograph young trees poking through the heather after 7 years. After another 22 years, the fence has been removed and there's a whole new generation of trees coming to take their place. I learned about this in the early 80s and kept thinking somebody needs to do something about this in much of the Highlands. There's only a few experimental things underway, so eventually it dawned on me maybe that somebody was me. So I made a commitment in 1986 to launch a project to help restore the forest. And this is one of the first projects protecting an area with a fence to keep deer and sheep out. And the trees that were already there are able to grow of their own accord. natural regeneration is the best method of restoring the forest. And you can see we caught this area just in time. And the photo on the left, just about the time the fence went up, the forest was very clearly dying. Those snags persist for decades, and on the right, 20-odd years later, you can see a new generation of trees coming to take their place. Regeneration is the best approach, but that only works if you've got a seed source. Most of the highlands, the trees are gone, so we plant trees. We've been doing that for over 20 years. It's all done by volunteers of all different ages, as you can see here. And that brings about a profound transformation in the landscape and in people. Top left here, you see a photo of somebody planting a tree on our very first planting week, April 1991. Look at how barren the landscape is. The stump is the only memory of the vanished forest. Down below, 10 years later, 11 years later, you can see the new trees growing, and in the final photograph, the stump is almost completely covered by the vegetation that's been able to recover in the absence of overgrazing. So we can see a young forest coming back in the landscape. It's a long-term project. It will be 250 years before this is a mature forest again. But we have to start somewhere, and we can see positive results coming. Rewilding involves the recovery of the whole ecosystem, though it's not just the trees. And when we get the balance back, we see the other plants beginning to recover. Heather here in bloom, bog myrtle, and look outside, you can see the peat hags there. They're a memory of how the land is elsewhere. It's very simple. It's very dramatic what a simple action can do to bring about positive change. The land in Scotland, most of it wants to be covered by forest. That's its natural condition. And if we help it, we can accelerate that process. And as a Scot, I'm personally embarrassed and ashamed to show pictures of peat hags from our country because it's a sign that we still do not care over most of the land. So the trees are recovering, the wildlife is coming back as soon as there's a habitat, so we can see butterflies, birds, sawfly larvae here, a rare species never found in the UK before until it appeared on our dwarf birch that we've protected. And also rewilding is moving to its next phase now. In Scotland, we've got a trial reintroduction of the European beaver. We're catching up with other European countries. After 70 or 80 years, we've finally got some beavers back. An official trial and an unofficial reintroduction process. People are using wild boar, including my organization, for their ecological services, the disturbance process that is currently missing from many of our woodlands. And there's now talk about moving to the next stage, bringing back the predators, because that tier, that top of the food web is totally absent. So the wolf was the last one to disappear in 1743, hunted out. It's probably not the first one to come back. We hope perhaps we could get the lynx back in the near future, and there's some movement underway on that front at the moment. So the final bit I want to talk about then is people. And if we think about restoration, one definition of it is helping to reweave or reconnect the strands in the web of life. But we are one of those strands, and that connection has been broken in Scotland, as it has in many places. And I've come to the conclusion that I grew up in Scotland, denied part of my birthright, the daily contact with wild nature. And most of us miss that in the world today. So restoration and engaging with that and engaging with rewilding helps to reconnect people very profoundly in that sense. Here are some of the key things I think that it helps to do for people. It reconnects people with the rest of nature. Very important when we've seen the things earlier today about people's technological influences. It reconnects people with place, because you have to know a place to be able to help it rewild, to allow the natural processes to prevail. It reconnects people with life and with each other, coming together to share the experience. For a week in our case, volunteers come, plant trees together, carry out other rewilding and restoration work. Meaningful contacts and connections are established. Very importantly, engaging in rewilding and restoration connects people with their own power. And so many people, I think, in the world today, faced by the scale of the challenges that confront us, feel, what can I as an individual do? When somebody comes and plants a tree that's going to live for 300 or 400 years potentially, they know they've really made a difference. Engaging in rewilding connects people with healing. healing the land and also bringing healing into ourselves, enabling us to become more whole again by connecting with the web of life around us. Restoration, rewilding is a work of hope, a sense that tomorrow and next century and 500 years we will pass on a healthy planet to our descendants and to all the other species that coexist on the planet with us. And it's a work of spirit too, reconnecting people with spirit, the spirit of life, the spirit of healing, the spirit that is in us and in nature all around us. So, engaging in rewilding provides an opportunity for people to experience one of the most important things in life, in my view, which is to express the highest qualities of our hearts and to bring those into physical form in practical work. And many of you, I'm sure, here are parents, and we all know as parents that our children flourish in an atmosphere of love. People who have what we call in English a green thumb have a special way with plants. It's actually not a green thumb, it's a green heart, because it's the quality of the heart that makes the difference. And we find that too. This is a labor of love, of giving something very fundamental back. And when we do that, we can accelerate the inherent natural healing ability of the earth. The earth is a living being, and like children, like plants, the earth responds to human love. And we see that in the feedback we get from our volunteers. People come and spend a week with us, out in a remote place, cooking together, sharing stories together, working together. And they go back to their homes, back to their lives, in many cases deeply changed, profoundly affected, and in some cases make life-altering decisions to change their lives. And here's a few quotes from people here that just articulate that. I want to give you a couple of specific examples. This man, Adam Griffin, came and started working with us in 1991 as a volunteer. We trained him up to leader volunteer weeks, and he then went on to organize fundraising events for us down in the southwest of England where he lives. But he kept saying, why do I come to Scotland when I live with a deforested landscape on my doorstep on Dartmoor in Devon? So he got inspired to set up a charity of his own, More Trees, which is doing exactly the same thing on Dartmoor in England, helping to restore the native woodland there. And then there's Jenny Martin, another star, if you like, from the volunteers who came and worked with us. She took part in 5 consecutive volunteer weeks. Nobody else has done that before or since. She then went on to become our volunteer week coordinator, set up our training program for leaders, and then really recognized the importance of getting children out into the forest. So she set up a day program, initially taking children out for a day, and that has developed and branched and become a separate charity, but still closely related, taking people out and offering important transformative environmental education experiences for children and young adults. So while this has been happening, the work of the John Muir Trust has been doing similar things. As I said, we complement each other. There's other organizations. There's been a real renaissance of consciousness in Scotland about the state of our land. And what I want to put to you is it's no coincidence at all that that process has gone on in parallel with the reclamation of political self-determination in Scotland. For nearly 300 years, all decisions about Scotland were made in London. But in 1999, we got the Scottish Parliament, and next year we're going to have a vote, a referendum on whether we should become an independent country. And thank you. I think in Scotland, we're recognizing the same thing that Indigenous peoples everywhere know. If you're not connected with the land, if you can't express care for the land, where is your future? So here's a quote from Professor Stephen. He was the first person to draw attention to the native pine woods of Scotland. To stand amongst the ancient pines is to feel the past. And there you see the ancient pines. Planting a pine gives birth to the ancient forests of the future and is helping to shape the future of our nation. So imagine a beautiful forest. One like that, it will take 250 years, but the future of that is in our hands. And I want to leave you then with a bigger picture, because in Scotland we're a microcosm of many parts of the world. We were in the forefront of deforestation and destruction of the environment, and the process of restoration needs to become a global process now. The future of the planet is in all of our hands, and I think everybody here today recognizes that. So that's the story from Scotland, and I hope that some of you might be inspired to come and join us. We run volunteer weeks every spring and autumn. Come and have an experience, and maybe you can take that on to benefit your own area. Thank you very much.